The rising cost of housing has become an urgent concern across Europe, with people facing high rents and house prices. The problem has prompted the European Commission to set up its first commissioner for energy and housing. Angelica Donati is a construction expert and president of the Italian Property Developers Association.
There's been a lot of protests, for example, from students who can't afford housing in the cities that they study in. And now there's a big push from industry as well, because there is a huge shortage of affordable housing for workers at every level. And so it's not just, let's say, an issue that affects the public, but it's affecting the productive sector as well, as industries can't attract workers. And so they've been pushing for a plan to basically build mid-range affordable housing for workers and employees.
And it's been a really turbulent time, hasn't it, of course, recently, with higher interest rates and supply chain issues really hitting the housing sector. Is a lot of that in the rear-view mirror? Are things looking a bit brighter in the future now?
The bubble that we saw post-COVID has kind of deflated a bit, but there is a long tail of problems that inflation carries with it, and which is why in the public sector especially we've been pushing as an industry body to have price revision mechanisms coded into our construction code to make sure that even if there are further spikes in inflation, that projects don't stop halfway, as happened during kind of the resurrection of our industry post-COVID.
And this is a Europe-wide issue, of course, isn't it? Would having a specific EU commissioner role in place help things, and what would you want to see from them?
Well, whenever issues are addressed at a centralized European level, it brings a cohesive approach that individual states can't themselves have, and also it opens the possibility, as with the recovery fund, as with the PNRR, as we call it in Italy, to potentially have common funds and common debt towards an issue. So the hope would be that a commissioner would not just be put in place to write laws about housing, but also to find common European means to fund housing stock across Europe.
And in terms of policy, the EU has the European Green Homes Directive, which aims to achieve climate-neutral buildings by 2050. Do you think that's a realistic target?
I mean, the numbers are very ambitious, and in Italy we had a measure that's since been wound down, which was called Superbonus, which was the 110% tax incentive. And actually, during the 2 years that it was in place, the number of buildings that were made more efficient annually was the number that we need to have annually from here to 2035 to reach our first milestone. So I think that the European Green Homes Directive is very ambitious, but it could be doable. However, and there we go back to the European Commissioner point, it can be achieved, but there needs to be a cohesive European strategy. It can't just be a taxpayer burden within the single countries. Now that we have a road to 2050 that needs to be defined with a common vision and common strategy, our sector can continue to be the one that powers economic growth across Europe.
Now, in the past, Angelica, you've been quite critical of Italy's short-term emergency planning. What would you like to see from Giorgia Meloni's government?
A long-term strategy. So we are all in agreement that short-term measures can be extremely inflationary. We've seen that in the years post-COVID, and we don't want that for the future. But I think now is the time to take stock and to think of a long-term strategy, especially as we have to prepare for the Green Homes Directive, for these milestones, which are 2030, 2035, and 2050, which provide enough runway to put in place long-term plans that can then benefit the whole economy.